Good morning, Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're close to the bottom of page 1423. So we learned yesterday, after 6 pages of explaining Kol HaMayrich BeEchad, one who prolongs or elaborates or extends, these are all the word Mayrich, in Echad. And Echad is Hashem Echad. When we say the Shema, they elaborate on the contemplation, explaining what that contemplation is. And in some, what he said is the contemplation, how all the Nivroim, all the creations which are created from divine speech, are encompassed and united with divine thought, which in turn is encompassed and united with the divine attributes, which in turn is encompassed and united with the root of the source of Atzilus and higher than Atzilus, all the way till the point of Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, where on that level the Tzimtzum doesn't conceal. So therefore the Yichud, as it is above, is also below. It's one level of seamless unity. And that's our contemplation. We have to reach that level of awareness to come to understand that as it goes down level by level and becomes more tangible, the divine energy, all the way down to the letters of speech, that in reality, it's all rooted before the Tzimtzum, where there it's all united, as he says, there's no mile of a master. So, and therefore it's all connected there. And then comes the second part of the contemplation. So the first part of the contemplation is after the Tzimtzum, leading us to before the Tzimtzum. The second part, before the Tzimtzum itself, there's also a number of stages and gradations, so to speak. This is referring to Ma'ir Bechel, like he says in Shari Yichud from the Mitler Rebbe. And that is going from the bottom up, Alei Saratzen, where it arises in God's desire. And there you have the capacity for spheres, the 10 hidden spheres. And there itself, there's level Eris and Kalim. So it's like 2 levels, subtle levels. So there's letters like the letters of the Luchis, the engraved letters, and there's the energy, the divine energy within them. That's spheres, that's Shemus Lashon Rabim, names, and they are encompassed, just like he spoke after the Tzimtzum, before the Tzimtzum, they're encompassed in Shmei, Shem Echad, one name, which means one form of expression before it begins that God allows the capacity for many names, which is different faculties or different attributes. And that's L'mayla Mebchinas Alei Saratzen Shem Echad. And all that is encompassed in Shmei Atzmi, in the name as it's included and encompassed within the source itself, Etzem Ha'er. And the name as it's encompassed in Atzmus, which is the level of Yechelis. God's potential, God's capacity to do all this. So we see here that the contemplation of Mayrich BeEchad, the elaborate contemplation, continues also before the Tzimtzum to understand even deeper the levels of unity and the seamlessness between divine and existence, all as it stands within God's capacity, ultimately. And that's Arichus BeEchad, B'chinas Ha'achdus, the Elamis. This is the elaboration or the elongation or the prolonging or the extending of Echad, the Achdus and Elamis, the unity of the divine in the world, the source, Ein Sof. The illness is Yochid Mamish. There's no anything else, is one singularity. The contemplates us. And that's where we stopped. I'm going to continue learning there now. Summation of Omein. without further. So now I think it's how many laws? 3. Eight lines from 1423, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along the text. Now he's going to go back to something that he began. I mentioned 7 pages ago. Remember, Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba, b'chol koach. Everyone who responds with all his might, Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba, keiron le'gzar din. It abolishes, it eliminates the severe judgment. If you go back to page 1416, 1417, he went and said, what's called koach? So the two interpretations, one is called koach, the interpretation koach 28, that revealing ati yidul na koach Adnai, a higher dimension of the divine energy, revealed in koach, in the 28 letters of koach ma'asav, of creation. And the second is b'chol kechi b'chol kavanose. With all his intention. To explain what means kol kavanose, he brought the Ma'arich be'Echad. So the contemplation, the elaborate contemplation on Echad is now going to help us understand what means b'chol kechi, that when you answer Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba with all your might, what does that mean? Remember, Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba. Remember, Yehai Shmei Rabba has 28 letters. Shmei Rabba means the great name. So now he's going to understand the words Omein, but then we say Yehai Shmei Rabba Baruch L'Olmo Mamayu is Baruch. What's Yehai Shmei Rabba? He's going to refer to the name. Remember, this all began by understanding what is a name. Shmo Echad. So now he's going to go back to understand that. So he says like this: V'zeu ha'eino Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba b'chol kechi. And this is the meaning of when someone responds or answers Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba with all his might. And Rashi said b'chol kavanose, which means not just with his might, like yelling it out, but with all of his intention. So Shmei Rabba, the level of Shmei Rabba, which means great name, like Shmei HaGadol, that's the level of Shmei HaGadol. That one singular name, which is the root of the many names of the divine, which is already the beginning of God's leaving room, the potential for being called Chazdan, Chesed, kind, Chacham, wise, the 10 hidden spheres. So Shmei HaGadol is the resource of that before the Tzimtzum. Dainu Ein Sof Shalifnei Tzimtzum. So it's the level of Ein Sof, or the infinite divine light before the Tzimtzum. So when you say Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba, Shmei Rabba is referring to that root of it all, the name, the divine name that we said is the first form of expression, another word for Oyer. And back in 1417, when he said B'chinas Shema is the Oisias, those are the letters, and they're rooted in the name. What is the name? The name refers to a form of expression, a form of gili, a form of awareness. So that's what Shmei Rabba means. So now he continues. So now he's combining these two statements through the elaboration, or the prolonging, or extending. Arichus that Ma'arich be'Echad that we just discussed about, the elaborate contemplation of Echad. Shemiyachid achol b'b'chinas Shmei HaGadol. That miyachid, we're finding the unifying element of everything in existence, all rooted in Shmei HaGadol, in God's first expression, His name, meaning God's revelation, as we discussed earlier. So, when a person is Ma'arich be'Echad, Shemiyachid hakol, that through his contemplation he's understanding how he's connecting and uniting all of existence, all the way with Shmei HaGadol, v'gam b'chinas v'ayidei harichus derech Shemiyachid hakol b'chinas Shmei HaGadol, v'gam b'chinas Shmei HaGadol. So zeh b'chinas hagili de'er sof, and also the level of Shmei HaGadol, this great name, Shmei Rabba, which refers to, like we said, is the gili, in Ein Sof. Not the Helam, it's the Gili. Because Shmei refers to a form of expression. Harihu miyachid b'atzmus is baruch. So miyachid, all of existence and all the levels that we discussed throughout Atzilus and higher and before the Tzimtzum and the Shemis, plural, connected to Shmei Gadol. In addition to that, you miyachid the Shmei. Remember, the name is not who. You're connecting the Shmei. Miyachid b'atzmus is baruch. That you're connecting the name with expression and uniting it with the core of Atzmus, of godliness. So it's not just the name as God is being expressed. It's how that expression is also encompassed in the source from where that expression comes. That's higher than Gili. Remember, Shmei HaGadol is still Gili. It's the highest level of Gili, the Etzem in Oyed. But now we're talking Commercial Kol B'Atzmus Mamish. Canal, as was discussed earlier. Ubechol b'chinas yuchud hu shemiyachid d'shmas eliyas b'teila be'echad. And all bechol b'chinas yichud. Yes, ubechol. And all these levels of unity that we've been discussing, level by level, from the letters of the words to the thought, to the attributes, and higher. Hu shemiyachid nishmasei. What is the person doing? The Rebbe Rashab explains he's connecting and integrating his neshama, the person who's being ma'arich be'echad, meaning the person who's doing the contemplation, li is betela be'echad. He's explaining a bit more, not just that he's contemplating it, but the neshama itself is becoming nullified and absorbed in this year. Through contemplating, we become absorbed in the echad itself. So he's adding another emphasis on Ma'arich Be'echad is also that the neshama that in each level is so-called not just contemplating with your mind and detached from it, but experiencing it in its entirety. So we're becoming absorbed in the experience. And by doing this, the Ma'arich Be'echad, which means B'chol Kavanose, all his intention, that's what it means. This comes with all his keich, with all his keiche. B'chinas hagdolas hakeach, which means hagdolas hakeach means the empowering or the strengthening of the power. Like we learned at the bottom of page 14, 16. So he said, what was Ata Yigdal na Koach, Adnai Koach? Whole Koiche is the Koach of the divine energy within existence. But then V'ata Yigdal na Koach Adnai, Hagdalas v'teis, that we add, that the person who's contemplating on Echad is adding. Because when God created the world, he invested in it a certain amount of energy that's commensurate with and concealed within existence. But here there's an avodah going on. The person is contemplating how, or that energy within existence is really not limited through the tzimtzumim, because it's really connected to the energy of the thought process, all the way up to the faculties and attributes, all the way up before the tzimtzum, all the way in Shmei HaGadol, all the way up to Yechelis in Atzmus, how Shmei is encompassed in Atzmus. So by doing that type of contemplation is adding Yigdal na Koyach. That's Hagdolas HaKoyach. So for example, let's say a person has the power to throw a stone for 100 feet. But if you exert yourself, you can throw 200 feet. That's Hagdolas HaKoyach. You're intensifying the power. How does the process work? In this case, it's not physical strength. It's the elaborate contemplation that the Ma'arich Be'echad that's requiring a lot of exertion and effort on the person's behalf, where he's investing in it. And like he just added in the parentheses, there's neshama is being absorbed in it, in this experience. So by doing that, he's revealing and drawing down more energy than the energy that's revealed in existence. That's the Ata Yigdal na Koyach Adnai, the Agdolas HaKoyach. And now he explains what level is that in the sphere, in the Lamaila. He says, Dehine Koyach Adnai, Zeh b'chinas Malchus the Ein Sof. Adnai usually refers to Malchus. Koyach Adnai is Malchus of Ein Sof. So we're not talking about the Malchus of Atzilus. or malchus of lower levels, where the divine is manifesting in existence. We're talking about connecting that divine within existence in dibur to Koach Adnai, malchus of Ein Sof. The in hagdolas Koach. So that's Koach Adnai in its own. Malchus of Ein Sof, which is higher than malchus of lower levels. But furthermore, we're magdil the Koach. We're intensifying, we're strengthening, we're adding energy and intensity to this Koach. So Koach Adnai itself is Malchus of Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. And Hagdolis Yigdal na Koach Adnai is that you're connecting in this contemplation Malchus of Ein Sof, which is like the 10 hidden spheres. Malchus of Ein Sof is the lowest of the 10 hidden spheres. And when you connect that to Shmei, Hagodl, the way it's encompassed in Atzmus Mamish, and now he's going even higher than Shmei Gilui. Hainu b'chinas helama atzmi dein sof, going all the way to the helama atzmi. As I mentioned yesterday, and a few times, that he keeps reverse. Sometimes he speaks about the highest Gilui, and sometimes he speaks about the helama atzmi. They're both different levels, but helama atzmi is usually a higher level than Gilui. So helama atzmi dein sof. That's Hagdolas Koach Adnai. That's adding and increasing through this. So the Ma'ir Be'echad is actually the same idea as Bechol Koiche. When you say Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba, the Yehai Shmei Rabba, you're basically doing what you do with Ma'ir Be'echad. You're taking Shmei. Shmei Hashem L'kein Hashem Echad. Shmei, the Shmei that's connecting all of existence to Shmei, or connecting all the way to the Etzem, that's called Koich, that's Ma'ir Be'echad. And that is the Kol Koiche, all the Kavona and everything that he's investing that strengthens Malchus of Ein Sof by connecting it all the way back to its source. Shazel, this level of Shmei, the way it's encompassed in the source, Shazel b'chinas Shmei hakol b'atzmusei. So this level, so Shmei that's not kol b'atzmusei, the name as it's expressed like a name is already, like he said earlier, even though it may not be expressed in a revealed way, but it's already a form of expression. I'm reading from the bottom of page 1420. He said that clearly. Not really Oyer, he said, but it's the beginning, the root of Oyer. The Shmei HaKol B'atzmusei, he says, that's the level of Helama Atzmi. Yeah, like it says elsewhere, and like we learned also earlier. Just a moment. Yeah, Shmei Atzmi. On top of page 1415, he said it clear. Shmei Atzmi b'chinas helama atzmi. Yeah. Shazel b'chinas Shmei HaKol B'atzmusei. Next page. Kamish Kosim HaKamach 1424. We turn the page. And now, he's connecting it back to what we learned earlier by Dezeh. And when a person does this contemplation and experiences it, the neshama is getting absorbed in the experience. And now it's b'chol keiche, b'chol kavanose, the Yehai Shmei Rabba, Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba. Through this, nimshel b'chinas koach ma'asov. This draws this new and fresh energy, or this higher level of energy, is drawn into Koach Maisov, Higud La'ame Koach Maisov, also Koach, but the Koach that is invested in existence, Dainu Klolos Ishtalshalis, in the general Ishtalshalis of the cosmic order that was created by God. What are you drawing? B'chinas Teisvus Eid, B'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof, Shalamayla Mayla Gam Mokar L'Mokar B'chinas Kav Hamida. That's what's being accomplished when the person is contemplating and elaborating on the contemplation of Ma'ir Be'echad, and when they're saying Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba b'chol keiche, meaning it's not just that God created existence. We, through our Aveda, are drawing from the highest levels now into existence. From where? From Atzmus Ein Sof, that's higher, far higher, Maila, much higher, from being even a source of a source for existence. If you remember, source of a source is already some relationship. Here we're going all the way back to Atzmus before there's even a relationship with existence. and you're drawing that, and before this relationship, a mokir, even a mokir, b'chinas kav amida. Kav amida is the kav, the measured line, or you can say the flow of divine energy that is commensurate with, that travels into existence. Here we're talking about reaching higher into Atzmus Ein Sof, b'chol keichei, and that draws a whole new level of energy. Just like I said before, when you exert yourself, you're drawing new energy from within your soul. Same thing here, through our Aveda. B'chol keichei, with all our might, with all our kavanah, we're drawing from the core source of the engine room of it all, that's higher than being a source, and we're drawing it into existence. So he's now tying it all together. And therefore, I'll soon stop if you have any questions. I just want to finish the whole topic here. Val Kain, then comes the second half. What does it say? When a person says, Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba, with all his might, with all his kavanah, it says, what is it? Keirin like Zardin. Abolishes, it eliminates the severe judgment. So he says, Val Kain Keirin like Zardin, the midas hadin. Nepach lebchinas brachimim gemurim. When you're able to access that deeper level of energy, so what does it do? It transcends and eliminates all boundaries, eliminates all severities. That's why the midas hadin nepach not only eliminates, it transforms it to rachimim gemurim, utter and total compassion. So in Seder Shtalshlus, when there's a structure, so there's midas hadin, there's midas hachesed, there's midas harachimim. That's the structure of spheres. But when you're able to reach this level of the etzem, you're able to get beyond that and eliminate any of the gvuras and the judgments that exist, and indeed transform them. If you remember earlier, we talked about the different ways you sweeten the waters. One way is you bring sweet water and you mix it into the bitter water, and it outnumbers it. By being simply nullifying it because it's so much more. Then we spoke about transforming the bitter water, and then we spoke about the bitter water itself gets transformed from its source. So he was alluding somewhat to that by doing this, we're able to transform Gvura, Gzar Din, like he says, Midas Adin, to Midas Rachimim Gmurim. Because we reached the core. If you don't have that Kol Keiche, then you can't do that. This requires going back to the place that's higher than Gvura and Chesed, which is why he uses the expression Helam Atzmi, because we learned earlier that Gvuras are rooted, that Tzimtzum itself is rooted in Helam Atzmi, God's power to conceal. But now we're going not to the concealment element of it, but God's power within it. And when we access it through Kol Koche, by saying Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba, and connecting all of existence back to its original source, in these highest levels that we're describing, all the way Shmaya Atzmi, Hakol B'Atzmusei, so that has the power, therefore, to transform all Gvura to Rachamim. Okay. Even though we haven't finished the paragraph and the end of the subject yet, but I'll stop here because we learned a lot. If anybody wants to clarify anything or any question.
Rabbi Jacobson, before the break, when we're talking about this level, right now we're talking about tapping in and bringing down that kind of energy. But before the break, in a few pages before, he was talking about when you say Ayin Yehai Shmei Rabba, we were infusing energy that never existed before. How do you reconcile the two? One is drawing down, one is infusing.
Why is drawing down and infusing a contradiction?
It's not a contradiction. It's just a meaning. Infusing meaning you're adding energy. Drawing, like in other words, you're adding energy above what Koach Maaseh was because of the 28 letters of Bereshit, and then the other one is that you're drawing down the energy.
To me, it's the same thing. I'm not sure which language you're referring to. There's a difference. Whatever he said here, he said back on page. You're referring to page 14, 16. Can you show me an expression that's different here than there? I see it being exactly the same thing.
You do, okay. I'm just using a dumbed down example. It's like if I'm adding water
I don't see a basis for any distinction. Whatever he said here, he said earlier on page 14, 16.
Okay.
I'm quoting exactly. Go back for what you're quoting. Look back at 14, 16 at the bottom, and look here and tell me if you see any difference.
Okay.
I don't see a difference. Koach Ma'asav is the koach that God invests in creation. Through our saying, Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba, B'chol koachei, we're drawing, he said clearly, a higher level of energy that's infusing it into existence. Exactly what he said there. Yeah. Called the Chitzenius Chachman, Yehai Shmei is also 28 letters. Taste of his koach, yeah. Okay, any other question? Any other questions?
I have one, Rabbi. When we're doing the sweetening thing here, is that like what the Baal Shem Tov did when he could sublimate the evil to its root? Is that the same concept, or is it a different concept?
I don't know. I would have to study what it says there and see if it's the same thing here. Here, I use the word sweetening. He doesn't use sweetening here. He says transforming. I was referring to much earlier, we're learning the whole at length different ways of sweetening gevura, judgments or severities, 3 levels that he spoke about. I was just connecting this to what we learned earlier. So you'd have to go back to what we learned earlier and then see the story of the Baal Shem Tov if it's associated. I mean, sweetening gevura has, obviously there's something in common wherever it says it. But to say exactly what level is which, I would have to look into what it says by the Baal Shem Tov. But the concept of sweetening judgment is at length. If you want to study it inside, we learned about it at length, literally at length, much, much earlier. And I still have much to say about it because there's different ways of sweetening. Here, he's talking about doing it through, there's also a way of doing it through the gvura itself. When you hit rock bottom or from distress and difficulty. Here he's talking about doing it through Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba, but that's, yeah.
Could you give the pages on the earlier discussion, or maybe later?
Yeah, sure. The pages are, we began. It begins on page 13, 15.
Okay.
13, 15 and
Thank
on.
you.
13, 15 and on. It begins really, he mentions it on 1307, but 13, 15 and on is where it really elaborates for many, many pages. And it's very much connected to what we're learning, but I'm going to speak about it much more later because there's the way you do it, Momata Lamaila, through Tefillah, and the way you do it, Momaila Lamata, through Torah. And here he's combining both because we're speaking here Torah, but we're already talking, as I mentioned yesterday, this is a prayer. Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba is a prayer. But it's a prayer where we're not necessarily coming from distress, it's coming from a very powerful surge within the person as they contemplate, elaborate, to contemplate and exert themselves and draw from this koach, from the highest levels of the source into existence, like we just learned. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me continue the parentheses. We're on the third line on page, we turn to page 1424. So he says now like this, and now, it was explained earlier, this parentheses goes now for, let's see here, till the end of the paragraph, I see. Yeah, so this is a parenthesis that will go till the end of the paragraph. We explained earlier, the Mashakasa B'Sefer Shel Beinim, that what writes in Tanya, Inyan Yichud Esis Hadibur, where he talks about the Yichud of Esis Hadibur, which means when God spoke and speaks the 10 statements that creates existence. So we learned earlier that it says on Tanya in chapter 22, I believe he referred to. Let me just see where he spoke about it. The Tanya was, let me just look it up. Refer to you. I thought it was on page 14, 17. No, it's not. Okay, regardless, I don't find it now inside. It's probably well, what he says in Tanya, I think it's chapter 22 he referred to. He explains that when you contemplate on God's words, so just like when a person speaks, the words that are expressed, even though others can hear it and has tangible shape and form, but the words themselves are connected to the speaker. So he explained that the dibur, the yichud of the words, same thing, when God created existence with his words, those words are connected and united with God, the speaker, the creator. That's what it says in Tanya. I'm just trying to find it inside in the Ayin Beis. For some reason it's eluding me here right now. Not sure why. Give me one more second. Let me just see if I can find it. Yeah, bottom of page 1421. Yeah, he says, so anyway, so we learned what he says there, that that's the level of Yechudei law, a higher form of unity, but it's in the Kalim, because we're talking about letters of speech. As soon as you're talking about letters of speech, you're talking about containers, because they're defined. They're tangible, you can discern them. So he says that's the level of Yechudei law when you recognize that those letters of speech, so like God's kalim, to express himself, are really connected with the speaker, with God, with the source. So that's called Yechudei law, the higher level of unity in the kalim. Ukamoi came by Elamis, and what the same thing is, that's Sadibur, the same thing with the worlds. Zayin kad amlichte. That is the idea of Kadam Lichte, which is the Gemara that talks about Mayrik Be'echad that he quoted before, the beginning of the paragraph on page 1421, that when you recognize Mam Lichte, you crown God as king, as the sovereign power, Lamailo Lamata, above and below, and all four directions, that means Mayrik Be'echad. So that's also the same idea, that just like you're connecting and showing that the letters and the words that God spoke are connected with the source is Yechudei law and Kalim. The same thing in Elamis, that's Kadam Lichte, when you essentially you recognize God as Am Lichte, God, you're what's the word I want to use? You're crowning God as king. Shahu Inyan Hashem Echad. That's Hashem Echad because it's Echad. Shazayin, the Kian va'aretz. Aleph is the unity. Ches is seven heavens. Zayin Reish is Zayin Rekian, the seven heavens, va'aretz and the earth. That's 8. That's Ches. And the Daled of Echad is Daled Ruches, the 4 directions: east, west, north, and south. That's what Echad is. Yachid, remember, is complete seamlessness. Echad means there's details, but the details are all part of one entity. So therefore, that is the level of the yichud of Kalim and the yichud in the Elamis. So then when Hashem after they were created, the Ches and the Daled, the seven heavens and earth, and the four directions, space, basically, after they were created, that's what echad means. They're bottled, they're nullified, and it's submerged or subsumed. And unified, ukanal, and as we learned, as was discussed earlier. V'zeu Shmei Echad, and that's the meaning. Shmei Echad, hayehu Shmei Echad, Shmei Echad, the b'chinas shem, the name shezeu b'chinas esius, commission is barley ill. Like we learned earlier, that what is a name? A name means that they're letters. This he explicitly explained on page. We spoke about name. Where did he say it? Right here on page 1417. He said a name is made of letters. So this is all the level Shmei Echad. That what? Shem. That the name of God, which means the letters of God, as they manifest in existence. That's the Shmei Echad. The Kamei Kain who ad the Reish Kol Dargin. And just as it is in the lower levels of speech, or the worlds that were connecting space and the structure of existence to the divine source, that's Shmei Echad. The same thing is that we go higher and higher, ad Reish Kol Dargin, all the way to the highest levels. B'chinas Esis b'madregas hayosa naila. So just like there are oisius letters in the lower levels, which is the words, which lead us to thought, and all the oisius, as he spoke about, the written letters, the engraved letters in Keser, and so on, same thing in the higher levels, oisius all the way in the highest levels, all the way before the Tzimtzum, that they're letters, like engraved letters through and through on the tablets. Hakol batul miyuchad. So all this we discussed earlier, all that is subsumed and united with the source. And according to this, we can say, Inyan Havaya Echad Shmei Echad. So now he's going to explain that initial expression that he began when he said, what is Havaya Echad Shmei Echad? So I'm going back now all the way to the opening of the paragraph on page 1417. What's Arichus Echad? And he said, "B'yemahu yeh Hashem Echad u'Shmei Echad." That when Mashiach comes in L'Asad Laveh, he will be one and his name will be one. So now the Rebbe Rashab is explaining that line. It's interesting, he uses a parenthesis to explain it, even though he mentioned it earlier, not in a parenthesis. But this is in a parenthesis, whatever reason. Maybe he doesn't want to confuse the subject matter itself. Anyway, that this is the difference, Havaya Echad and Shmei Echad, the difference between Chayui, the energy, Oyer, and Garmui, the Kalim, that we discussed earlier. Remember, we learned that even before the Tzimtzum, there's a Me'ain, there's a similarity, a very subtle difference between energy and container, not actually containers, but God envisioning the containers or envisioning the structure. So he says that's the difference. That Havaya Echad is referring to the Oyer, and Shmei Echad is referring to the Kalim, which explains that what he says. That's why he brought the Tanya here, because the Yichud Ilah in the Kalim. Because when you're talking about letters, you're talking about structure. That's the beginnings of Kalim, of containers. Oyer is higher than containers. Like you spoke before from the Pardes, the Oyer, you don't talk about a source. They're not defined yet. Oyer is much more shapeless and seamless. So he says that's the difference between Havaya Echad and Shmei Echad. This needs explanation, but let me just read till the end, and then I'll explain. And it was explained the Lamaila Matzilus, that higher than Atzilus, and same thing before the Tzimtzum, before it arose in his desire. Arising in the desire is Atzilus the Klolos, is like Atzilus in macrocosm. before the Rosen's desire, which we call Shmei HaGadol, Shem Echad, that is the level that's higher than Atzilus, the Klolos. So he says, there's no chayur v'garmui. There's no yet energies and containers. That's only in Atzilus. Because there everything is energy. You don't even have the beginnings and even the stirrings of the beginning of structure. This was stated clearly at the end of the paragraph on page 1422. I'm just keeping cross-referencing because he's bringing together many subjects here. So we learned that's all level of El. Zeu davai v'elikim uchad mamish. That's Havaya and Elikim, which later would be the source of energy is Havaya. The source of Kalim is Elikim. But here we're talking about the Echad Mamish because it's not yet become two tracks. It's all within the divine energy. Think of it this way. The artist has begun, let me correct myself, not begun. The artist is still in a state where he's not yet defined what kind of art he's going to create. So there's no structure. It's just the fact that there's artistic energy. Artistic energy is all energy. It's once he desires and rises in desire and he begins to envision a particular form of art, then you start having, okay, this is the form, and this is the function, or this is the keli, and this is the oir. But in the state that we're talking now, higher than Atzilus, or higher than Aleis HaRatzon that arose in his desire, everything is pure energy. Havaya and Echad, Havaya and Elikim Echad Mamish. Okay, I see this is all very, very dense piece here. I'm going to have to unpack this very slowly. But let me first read it inside, then I'll go over it in detail. Okay. The Gamba Atzilus, and also in Atzilus, remember Atzilus is also a world of unity. Iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'garmu echad. It's true, you have energy and containers, but all the containers are completely one with the divine. So they're also Havaya v'Elikim kul echad. Havaya and Elikim are also one. But now it's not one as they are pre the two tracks. There are two tracks and they're all one. That Simsum of Atzmus Kamei Hagili. Because Elikim, Simsum, it just comes from the power of Atzmus, just like Gili. So therefore, it's also one with God. The Lechein Ein Mitzamtzim. Like we learned earlier, that's why it's not Mitzamtzim. It doesn't diminish. From the perspective of the source, there's no diminishment. It's only from the perspective of the recipient. Canal, like we learned earlier. V'gam, and additionally, Shahadei Kavonas at Simsum Hu Agili. Additionally, the intention of Simsum, the purpose of Simsum, is in order to reveal, not to conceal. But you need to channel it, so you need to conceal in order to reveal. The Kavonas Agilu Shei Ayidei at Simsum. And the intention of the Gili, initial revelation, is in order for it to go through the tzimtzum, to be able to reach the recipients. Commission is bar le'il, as was discussed earlier. This is at length in volume 2. Okay, so there's a lot here to unpack, a lot of details that the Rebbe Rashab has now brought together, literally entire, I would say hundreds of pages of discussion back in volume 2 and also in volume 3. So I'm going to need to go through this in very slowly and detail. I just wanted to read it inside, and now I'll explain. But let me just first put things into general context here. Before the parentheses, he essentially established that through our avodah, our work of contemplating at length, elaborating, Ma'arich be'Echad, on the divine unity of everything, right, tracing it all the way back to the source. So that is saying Omein Yehai Shmei Rabba b'chol koach. We're drawing from Shmei Rabba all the way back to the source of Shmei Rabba, the great name, as it's in the root, in the Helam Ha'atzmi, in the divine essence. What does that do? That has the power to transform even Gvura, Gzar Din, judgment, severity, into compassion. Okay. Now, but you recall, this was many stages that he discussed. going all the way from the words of speech that create existence, and going backwards, climbing all the way to thought, to the attributes, to before Atzilus, to before the Tzimtzum, and before the Tzimtzum itself, we also have the levels, similar levels, but in a far more subtle form within the Etzem itself. In this parentheses, what he's doing is going into more detail in explaining the different levels of the unity that we contemplate on. He didn't elaborate so much on the differences. He just spoke about climbing. That first we understand the speech is connected to the thought, and the thought is connected to the attributes, and the attributes are connected higher and higher, all the way to the source, where God leaves room for existence. Nesinas Mokim, Yechelis, even higher, God's capacity to create. And all of that is united. In the parentheses here, he's actually talking about different levels of Yichud. Because as we climb, not every level is the same level of unity. Ultimately, Hamayich Be'echad leads us to a total seamless unity in Yachid Miyuchad. But that's when you get to that highest level of understanding where everything is just one singularity. God, Eined Movadeh like. But before we get there, there are stages. You can't begin by saying that everything is rooted in the source before you go through the stages. To give a simple example, the same example I've used time and again. When you look at a piece of art, so the first thing is you recognize the art itself, and you realize it's all connected, a certain message, and a certain sentiment that the artist wants to convey through this art. So what have you accomplished with that? By looking at the world, it's not just a fragmented, random world of coincidences. It's all part of an art, divine art. It's God's words. Or the same thing, you read a book. There are many sentences, many letters, many words, many sentences, many paragraphs, all telling us a narrative. So there's Hashem Echad there. On the first level, you've taken a fragmented universe. You've taken all the details of Ches and Dalet, the seven heavens, earth, the four directions, time and space, and instead of seeing it as a bunch of separate, disjointed elements, it's one piece of art, it's unity. But that's called, generally in Chassidus, Yichud Tata. Why? Because it's still the structure within existence. The book is made up of details. Existence is made up of details. But in the details, you see their cohesion. You see their cohesiveness, their harmony. And therefore, you see the divine structure and design within it all. The next level would be where you take the words of God's masterpiece, whether it's art or, I'm giving both example of art and literature, and authoring a book, or an artist creating a painting, a portrait. But then you go further and say, one second, all these words and details are all rooted in the thought of God that is not quite as tangible and as structured. So now you're going to a higher level of yichud, of understanding more of the divine unity within it, not just that the unity that creates cohesion, that all the details are all part of one story, one narrative. But you're starting to see much more, or coming to recognize, what was the artist thinking when he created all of this? So you're going more into the artist's perspective, but still it's the level of thought. So he called that the yichud of dibur, yichud ilah and kelim, because you're dealing with kelim. You're not dealing with oyer, you're dealing with the kelim, the structure of existence. But you're recognizing how it's all connected to the designer or the artist. As you climb higher, the details become less significant. And what you're coming to is coming down to understanding, I only want a connection, I want to understand how the artist works. And then you come to a point where he's not even an artist, because he's not even yet, he's beyond existence, he's beyond the art that he created. And then you come to realize at the end of it all that this whole art that I began with is actually all it is divine expression. And all rooted in a place beyond expression even, as we've been learning. So essentially you see here, like we learned earlier at length, that the more tzimtzum there is, the more concealment, the more you have a tangible structure. The less concealment, the higher you climb, the more it becomes more and more shapeless and less defined and more amorphous, till you get to the highest point where there's just a singularity, yachid and miyuchad, not even echad anymore. Complete, seamless, shapeless, and it's only God wishing existence. So existence, all it is a divine expression, which is actually rooted in a place that's higher than expression, higher than Helam and Gili. So what he's essentially saying in the parentheses is Eris and Kalim is already within structure. Then there's a point that's higher than Eris and Kalim. So Havaya Lakim are the two tracks as they manifest within Eir and Keli. Then there's a place where, and they're united. And then there's a place where they're higher than even two tracks, they're just one. Like we said, Havaya Hua Lakim, or even higher, that they're not even two, like he said, Chad Mamish, until you go to the highest levels where it's all rooted in one source that has the capacity to reveal, the capacity to conceal. In his capacity, in his Yechelis, there's no difference between concealment and revelation. However, one final point, and again, I'll elaborate on this in the coming classes. One final point is this Yichud is not just above. In Atzilus, you also can come to appreciate it. Because even though in Atzilus there's already a structure of Eris and Kalim, but Atzilus too recognizes they're both divine. Because like he said, in Atzilus itself, because the Tzimtzum also comes from God, just like the Gili comes. So the Keli, the same creator who created the revelation, the same artist who created the energy within the art, also created the structure within the art. But furthermore, even more than that, I don't know if more than that he says, but in addition to that, the intention of the Keli is not to be, and the intention of the Tzimtzum is not to conceal, but to reveal. And the intention of the revelation is in order to be concealed through the Tzimtzum and be revealed through the Tzimtzum. And this we discussed at length in volume 2, as I mentioned. When he spoke, Vayedaita Yom Vashavesa Levavecha Ke'avayu Hu Elikim B'Shamayim Mal Va'aretz Mitachas. So he said, why is the how could you transform the Tzimtzum? Because the Tzimtzum is really for the purpose of to reveal, and the Oir, before the Tzimtzum, its purpose is to go through the Tzimtzum. So they're really not just they're rooted in one source that God has the power to reveal and conceal, but even as they are in their own structure of revelation and concealment, they too are fully integrated and fully interconnected with the other. Meaning, when a teacher is concealing some of his ideas in order to teach, it's also part of revelation. And when he's revealing, it's also part of concealment because he needs to reveal it in a way that's commensurate to the student. So all this shows us an achdus, even when they are two tracks. And it's all rooted because in its original source, they're really actually all one. And then there's one final thing, which he doesn't mention here explicitly, but he did mention earlier, Ein Oid. The end of the verse is Ein Oid, that even the concealment itself reveals the Helema Atzmi. The concealment itself reveals a divine power. Not just that it is one with revelation and is connected with it, but it has its own particular revelation of the divine power that's beyond revelation and concealment. But that I want to talk about at another point. This is somewhat a little explanation of this parentheses and understanding the levels of unity that he's been addressing here. I said I will go over this more than once to make sure it's very clear. But for now, I'll stop here at the end of this paragraph and take any questions if you have any. I hope I didn't lose you with this whole elaboration, but it's necessary to understand this whole piece, which, as I said, is very dense. And if you notice, he said canal or commission is Barliel probably 5 or 6 times at least, which means he's connecting a lot of what he said earlier, is bringing it all together, but is doing so in a very, I would say, concentrated and dense way. That's why it needs elaboration. But go for it. Anybody want to ask anything?
Rabbi, what do you call that essence of Hashem before the Havaya and the Elohim? What is it called?
Well, by definition, it doesn't have a name.
Okay.
So you can call it etzem. What he calls Shmei Yikol Batzmusei. Havayin Elikim are names. Sometimes you refer to Anoichi. You say Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. Anoichi is higher than Havai Elikim. Here he's not using that name because here he wants to emphasize that it's higher than names. It's where the name originates from. So Havai Elikim, there's where there are actually two names. They function two different functions. By the way, Havai is Rachamim and Elikim is Gvura. Zar Din. They are basically revelation and tzimtzum and concealment. Or further down, it's Eiris and Kalim, energy and containers. Higher up, Havai Elikim originates in Shmei HaGadol, one name that doesn't have a name. Usually it refers to Havai as Shmei HaGadol, but Havai as it's not as part of the structure of Havai and Elikim, or even higher. And then ultimately, there's the Shmei, the way it's named, it's encompassed in God's capacity, Yechelis, like he says, which is even higher than, like he says, Shmei. Yeah, the way it's called Atzmus, and there's now sometimes Hu and Shmei is also these two levels. Shmei would be the name, Hu would be him. But there's even, I think in Hu itself, as I said, there's Havai Echad or Shmei Echad. So there's the Havai Echad he referred to here was Eiris, and Shmei Echad he referred to Kalim. So Havai would be Eir, and Shmei would probably be Elikim. There's different ways to explain it, but that's a general picture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let's stop here, end of the paragraph on page 1424. And as I said, I will go over this again and make sure it's very clear. Go over it a little more slowly. I have to sum up some of the things we've been learning in, as I said, in volume 2 and volume 3. Okay. But this is definitely connecting with the central themes of Ayin Beis, the whole interface. Yeah, I'm also going to go back to the beginning of volume 3 at the bottom of the page. Will also, I think, help us understand what we just learned. Okay, we'll do that tomorrow.